Are you struggling to close deals, or maybe find that you're spending hours every month on proposals that just don't close? The problem might be your sales process, and in today's video, I'm actually going to share with you a proven process for how to go from leads to opportunities to wins. Okay, so if that's something you'd like some help with, stay tuned, and also make sure you stay to the end because I'm going to share with you a really super simple hack, something you can implement today that's going to actually help deals moving forward and help with your close rate. Hi, if you don't know me, my name is Joel Norton. I'm an ex-agency CEO, and I used to run an 8-figure MarTech agency. Today, I help ambitious agency owners who are looking to build a more profitable and sustainable business, one that runs and grows without them, and ultimately help them win better quality clients they love, increase their profit, and free their time. Now, I'll just share with you quickly a quick story about a new client that I was working with, and we were going through the other week and just dissecting a little bit more around some of his sales opportunities. And one of the things we were looking at was how much time he was spending on existing opportunities. And when we actually added it up, we realized that he'd spent 8 hours, so let's just call that a day, one day over the course of a week, doing a custom presentation on proposal for an opportunity which, as I was digging into it, really wasn't qualified. So basically, and as it turns out, they're not ready yet. Okay, so now I said, when we went through the numbers, I said, if you're doing that every week, you're losing a week every month doing proposals for people that are not going to close. And no wonder you're so stretched thin as far as doing all of this stuff. Now, I also wanted to share a little story about my experience. The old Joel, many years ago, whenever a lead came in, I was so excited about getting a lead that I would just jump straight into presentation mode. And so I'd be sharing about us, doing a presentation, doing our credentials, which, every client sees the same thing from every other agency. So it was just same. And fast forward a month or 2 months, and they sort of disappeared. And I'm constantly, just checking in, just following up, and of course, nothing ever happened. All right. So what I learned is you actually need to have a defined sales process, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. Now, before we jump into that, let's just change screens quickly. I just want to talk in the context of the agency growth model, because the reality is that different agencies or different types of agencies have different growth model. So on the left here, we've got what I'd call a productized service firm. Okay, now this is really essentially, if you're in digital marketing, this is very much in this space. Okay, one where effectively a digital marketing agency can have dozens to hundreds of clients. Okay, I'm not going to say cookie cutter, but as far as the delivery of the work, it's much more consistent from client to client to client. So it's much easier to stack. All right, so you can literally, let's do it this way. You can just have dozens and dozens and dozens of clients if you want to grow that big. Okay. Now on the right hand side, it's a bit different. This is for what I call customized service firms. Or creative service firms, okay? And the way I look at this is much more, as you see, for these types of businesses, the reality is, let's use a different color, that they're probably only going to have 8 to 12 clients. If you look at the big creative agencies, the old school advertising agencies, right? They generally all want to have a big client in each of the main categories. They want a telco, they want an airline, they want a beer brand, they want an automotive or car brand. You go through, they want a bank or finance, that sort of thing, because part of that is they can't manage conflict, but the other thing is they just want to have these big clients. All right. Now the reality is, in a creative services firm, whether it's advertising or marketing, or if it's around customized services where you're doing, for instance, in the agency that I used to run, where we did a lot of Salesforce implementation. So there's an element of customized services. So we're doing a big implementation for a large enterprise client around how to implement Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So that was customized. But then there were elements that then, after the initial engagement, that then fell on the left-hand side, which was much more productized. So the types of best practice things that we would then implement around marketing automation, etc., that then fell more to the left. But in this scenario on the right-hand side, where you can only manage a small number of clients because it's customized services. So in this scenario, if you think the maximum number of clients I can have really is probably 8 to 12 clients. When you think like that, then you need to think more like an airline, okay? And it's like how you manage your yield management. We've got a certain number of seats. So the way that we grow revenue is really in growing the size of the client, okay? So if you think about that in terms of, we're going to have some clients that are in sort of economy seats. We're going to have some clients that might be in premium economy. And we're going to have some clients in business. And then we want to have, 1 or 2 clients in first class, okay? And so in terms of growing agency revenue, what we want to do is slowly over time, we're increasing the value of the clients. We've always got a limited number of seats, but we just want to increase the value of those clients over time. That's how you grow revenue for a creative or customized services firm. All right. So let's just have a look at the actual agency sales process. So I'll do this. This is broadly, which covers both sort of digital marketing and also creative and customized. Okay. And then I'll dig into it a little bit more specifically for each of those. So the first thing is, the first lesson here is that you need to have a defined sales system, okay? What I find is quite often in agencies is that the owner is like they've got their own system, and usually that means that there isn't a system, okay? I'm not going to say winging it, but they don't have a formal structured process. They've just got their own thing, partly because the business was built off the back of their network and connections, okay? So they've already built trusts, through their existing network, okay? That's how it's grown. But the more and more as you exhaust your existing network and you're doing more marketing and you're doing more outbound, the more important it is to have a defined sales process, okay? That's the first thing. The second, so in this scenario here, I'm going to assume, I'll just make that clearer, that we've got inbound leads, okay? So what I'm talking about here does not include lead generation, okay? If you're interested in that, in this example, I've got another video where I talked a bit about the types of salespeople or business development people you might have in your agency. If you're interested in that, I've got another video. I'll link to it in the description below. But this is just talking about the sales pipeline process. So I'm assuming at this point we've got inbound leads that are coming in, all right? So the first step is we want to have a discovery call. And this is all about qualification. Oh, let's just say qualify. That's easier. How do we qualify? And a lead is qualified when we know their budget. We've identified they're a decision maker. So A stands for authority. They've got authority to make a decision. N is need. So they need what we do. So it's banned. And T is timing. So they're ready to make a decision now. They're ready to buy now. Okay. So you need to have each of those things. If you don't have a budget, if you're not clear on timing, you should not be going to the next step. And this is where I see a lot in that example I shared a second ago, where they're not qualified up front. And so we spend all this time doing custom proposals for people that don't have the budget or they're not ready to buy now. Sometimes people are just the fact is that half of the people you talk to are actually just going to be in discovery mode. They're trying to understand a little bit more. They're doing research. They're finding out, what's going to be involved in engaging an agency down the track, okay? So we don't want to be spending time and energy doing proposals for them. So that's the first thing. And making sure that it is, I call it a discrete qualification process, okay? We don't qualify and then start selling in the same call or the same meeting. It needs to be separate. I don't care if the second step is the next day. It needs to be separate, okay? So that discovery call or meeting is usually about 30 minutes. Okay? Then after that, the next step is that we want to identify, I call value drivers. Okay? And part of that is quantifying So their goals and the problem. Okay, so in that process, we're identifying what the value drivers are, so what's important to them. That helps us understand what are the key things that will help them make a decision to move forward. And we also want to quantify it in terms of understanding where are they trying to get to and where are they now. So we want to understand what's that gap, because ultimately we're going to help them bridge that gap from where they are now to where they want to get to. Now, once we've done that, that's really around effectively, that's the opportunity qualification. Okay, so we're qualifying actually how big is this opportunity, all right? The next step is then doing a proposal. And just another small hack, we never email a proposal before we've gone through it, okay? We always present the proposal, always. Because as soon as you've sent it, you've lost control, and that's when clients can then just start ghosting you, okay? So you always make sure that you present. Okay, so we've qualified the opportunity, then we've presented the proposal. The next thing is what I call, we then do a decision chat. We actually have a meeting which is actually about making a decision, okay? And it's designed specifically to force a yes-no. And that's really the last bit, is it's a win. It's either a yes or it's a no. I would much rather know it's a no now and get a no sooner than wait 3 months or 4 months and not know what's happening. Okay, I'd much rather know no now, because we're making decisions on the business around hiring people, team structure, whatever it might be, because we think something might come in, and we're waiting a month and another month and another month, and that's what kills agency profitability. So we want to have a part in the process where we actually get to a decision and call it decision chat, and a no is okay. A no is often better than a maybe. It just means no, not now. We can revisit it at a later point. But as I said earlier, we don't want to get to that point. It really comes back to making sure that we do what we need to up here. Otherwise, this is all wasted time. Okay. All right. Now let's just talk, because I said earlier that it's slightly different structure and methodology, and also scripts that I use depending on what type of agency you are. So if you think about this in terms of, I call this the sales success roadmap, okay? So on the vertical axis, I've got objective at the top and subjective at the bottom. This is really, this is referring to the type of agency that you are, okay? So, objective is much more around, like it's facts, it's figures. Like I've got some numbers and things here, right? Objective means it's much more, it's quantifiable, it's around numbers. So generally speaking, this is around digital marketing. If they're doing SEO, if they're doing paid search, if they're doing paid social, it's objective because we can quantify exactly what the search volumes are, expected results, that sort of stuff. And so the process for that is very different to, say, at the other end of the spectrum where something is subjective. So subjective is usually where it's more creative, okay? So creative services. Anything that's creative, because it's like, well, how much is a website? How much is a logo? How much is a brand? The value is very much more subjective, okay? So for that scenario, the process and the scripts we use is different, very different to what you would use in this essence where you've got digital marketing, okay? And then in the middle, I've got businesses that might be sort of marketing website where they've got elements that are objective and elements that are subjective, okay? Now you can see horizontally, we've got the number of meetings. So from 1 through to 5, okay? So let's just start at the top with digital marketing, okay? So I've got, I've got one client who's in the digital marketing space. They do lead generation, and they generally have a 2-meeting close, okay? The way I would do it is you're probably more like 3, okay? But the first thing, as I said earlier, is that you have a discrete process around how you qualify people. Budget, authority, need, and timing. Okay, so I've got a framework called the qualifier framework, and that's a 30-minute call, and that's the first thing. Okay, Then we set up a second call. Now that what I'm sharing with you is the framework names. It's not necessarily what I called the meeting names, okay? But the next one is, I then have the Green Brain framework, and this is where we really try and understand a little bit more around we're digging more into what's most important for them and what the opportunity is. And quite often I'll then dovetail that with actually the proposal. So I'll incorporate, because in digital marketing, we're able to actually share what those packages and things are on that call, okay? Because there isn't as much customization. We don't have to go away and think about. We've already got something. So we're doing both what I call the Green Brain framework and the proposal presentation in that second call. And then the third step is, in that call, we're setting up the decision chat, which could be 3 days later, 5 days later. Rather than waiting for them to come back to us, we want to force the decision. Because the reality is, they'll have all the information they've got, okay? So book that meeting in that meeting, okay? So that's a 3 meeting close, okay? Now the next level down is for a marketing agency, or they might be doing website development, that sort of stuff. So in this scenario, same thing, got the qualifier framework first up. Then there's a separate piece, which is then the Green Brain framework. We can use that same script and framework. What we're not doing is the proposal, okay? So in this scenario, we do the proposal presentation separately, okay? And that's usually because in the marketing website, there's a little bit more customization. So we need to spend a bit more time thinking about what's the right pricing that we're going to put forward for that client. And then we have the decision step. So it's generally probably a 4 meeting close in this scenario, okay? Now at the bottom, we've then got the creative agencies. We use exactly the same qualifying process up front. The qualifier framework works for all of them. This is where it gets a little bit different. So the next step is, I've got a different framework, which is called the value identifier framework. Because with creative, as I said, it's much more subjective. And so we need to really try and understand how they define value. So we're going to understand what that is, because it's more rubbery. It's harder to pin some numbers on it. But part of the process is trying to quantify that. But we're going to do the value identifier framework. Now we might do that 2 times or 3 times. That might be, if there's one person, we might end up doing that process over 2 sessions. Sometimes where it's a big pitch or something like that, then we might have to have multiple meetings with a few different stakeholders, because how each of the stakeholders define value is a little bit different, okay? So you might find that there's a few of those. There could be 2 or 3 value identifier sessions. Then we have the proposal presentation separately, and then we have a decision chat. So in that creative one, it could be even 6 meetings, okay? So there's going to be more work involved, which makes it even more important that we're doing the qualifying right up front. Because imagine having all those meetings and they're not qualified properly. It's just burning time and energy and investing in stuff, okay? So that gives you a sense of what a proven, like this works. I'm working with digital marketing agencies that are using the top one, and I'm working with creative agencies that are using the bottom one, and helping them to increase their sales conversion, and importantly, also increasing average customer value, which I haven't covered in this, but I will do a separate video and I'll go through that. But that's really the sales success roadmap, okay? And lastly, I promised at the start I was going to give you a super simple hack that you can implement today that I guarantee is going to improve your sales process. And it's called BAMFAM, all right? Now, BAMFAM stands for, it's an acronym, book a meeting from a meeting. That's what it stands for, okay? Now, what does that mean? So in each of these sessions, so the way that I used to do it was you'd have a meeting with somebody, and then you talk about the next meeting, but then you'd leave, and then you do the chase and the merry-go-round, trying to coordinate people's calendars and diaries for the next week or 2. And so the sales process drags out and drags out. So instead of meeting a couple of days later or the next week, it ends up being 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later. And so the sales process just takes a lot longer, okay? When you use the BAMFAM approach, You never finish a meeting until you book the next meeting. You never finish a meeting until you book the next meeting. So we're always getting the next one. So when I'm doing the qualified framework, if they're a fit, then we book a date for the next one. And when I've done the proposal, even when I've given them the proposal in any of these, I book the next meeting in that, okay? Bam, fam. I book the next meeting. It might be a week away. That's fine. It gives them some time to think about things, but making sure that I've got a time in the diary because I want that decision. It doesn't matter if it's a no. Obviously, I want a yes, but I'd much rather a no than a maybe or taking another 2 months to make a decision, because the reality is they shouldn't need any longer. They should have all the information they need, and if they don't, then they need you to share. They've got some questions or queries around things. You need to help some more. So we always book the next meeting before you finish the current meeting. Okay, I guarantee if you do that, it's going to shorten your sales cycle, and that is so important as far as the agency profitability and revenue. All right, covered a lot. I hope that was helpful. If you make sure you check out my other video where I talk about the different types of salespeople. I've also got another video which talks about sales velocity. So if you want to understand a little bit more about that and how important it is to shorten the buying cycle, make sure you check that out. Anyway, I hope that helps. I'll see you in the next video. Here's your next win. Cheers.